How does a man who has never shed blood with his own hands become responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands? Is it possible to justify your involvement in mass murder by saying that you only signed papers and followed orders? Arthur Liebenschel is one of those who stood behind the soulless death machine in the Auschwitz and Majdanek concentration camps. He claimed that after his appointment at Auschwitz, the most severe punishments were abolished, improvements in sanitary conditions were introduced, and public executions were stopped. He insisted that he did not personally give orders for mass killings, did not stand at the gas chambers, did not participate in the breeding. I tried to restore order in the camp and alleviate the suffering of the prisoners. I was not a murderer, he repeated at the hearing, but it was he who coordinated the processes that ensured their smooth operation. His story is an example of how ordinary people turn into cogs in monstrous systems when they reject moral choices. That's the kind of person we're going to talk about today. Early years and early career. Arthur Liebenschel was born on November 25, 1901 in Posen, then still part of the German Empire. Raised in the strict, patriarchal atmosphere of East Prussia, he received a standard education for that time. He studied at a public school for 8 years, then at a commercial college for 3 years where he studied the basics of economics and management. Young Arthur began his career in the railway administration of Posen, a calm, measured job in the turbulent post-war years. But history left no chance for stability. In January 1919, against the background of the Polish uprisings and the struggle for independence, Liebenschel was forced to leave his hometown to escape Polish captivity. Thus began a new stage of his life service in the border guard. In September 1919, he joined the Reichswehr, Germany's limited armed forces after the Treaty of Versailles. His military career lasted more than 10 years, and in October 1931 he completed his service with the rank of Oberfeldwebel. At the same time, Liebenschel continued his studies and received a diploma from a commercial school with a degree in economics and management. In those years, his path could have ended in a peaceful career as an administrator. But Germany was sliding into an abyss of economic crisis, political violence, and radicalization. On February 1, 1932, Arthur Liebenschel joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party and at the same time was accepted into the ranks of the SS. From that moment on, his fate was firmly linked to the Nazi machine of power. On August 4, 1934, he became an aide-de-camp to Walter Gerlach, commandant of the Columbia House detention camp in Berlin, and then of the Lichtenberg camp. It was here that Liebenschel first encountered the prison camp system, a system that would soon grow into a large-scale extermination mechanism. Career growth. Concentration camp inspection and SS headquarters. Arthur Liebenschel's career growth in the Nazi system was rapid and logical. His efficiency, organizational skills, and willingness to obey without question made him a valuable asset to the SS. On July 5, 1937, Liebenschel was transferred to Berlin, where he took up the post of Chief of Staff of Theodor Eicke, the creator and inspector of the Death's Head SS detachments. These detachments were responsible for the protection of concentration camps and the subsequent exploitation of prisoners. Liebenschel served in the concentration camp inspection until May 1940, working in the political department, and then was appointed Chief of Staff. It was at this time that he formed his ideas about the camp system, not as a temporary means of isolating undesirable elements, but as the foundation of a new racial policy of the Reich. His job was to develop instructions, control discipline among SS men, and improve the productivity of the camps. Personal involvement in crimes was minimal, but administrative support for the repressive machine was maximum. On January 30, 1941, Arthur Liebenschel was promoted to the rank of SS Obersturmbannführer, which corresponded to an army lieutenant colonel. As part of his powers, he issued an order requiring SS men who had been awarded military merit crosses for participating in executions not to call their actions executions in any case, but to use the term performing tasks important to military operations. The formulations became more impersonal in order to mask the monstrous essence of what was happening. From mid-March 1943, Liebenschel became head of the Management Group DI Central Administration in the main administrative and economic directorate of the SSWVHA, while simultaneously serving as Deputy Inspector of Concentration Camps Richard Gluck's. Now he was at the very top of the administrative structure of the camps, the one that coordinated the transportation of prisoners, the distribution of labor, and the organization of mass killings. This position prepared him for the next step, the direct leadership of one of the largest death camps. The Commandant of Auschwitz. A new order of death. On November 11, 1943, Arthur Liebenschel assumed one of the most sinister posts in the history of mankind. He was appointed Commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp. His predecessor, Rudolf Hoes, turned the camp into a well-functioning machine of mass destruction. Liebenschel was faced with the task of maintaining the camp's effectiveness in the face of a worsening war and increasing pressure on the Third Reich. According to the testimony of the prisoners, some changes took place with the arrival of Liebenschel. The horror, of course, has not disappeared anywhere, but the administrative style of the new commandant was different from the straightforward sadism of his predecessors. He partially improved the conditions of detention of prisoners in the main camp. Preference was given to political prisoners rather than criminal elements when appointing capos. An extensive network of scammers was actually curtailed. Periodic breeding in the bunker of Block 11 has stopped, followed by executions in front of the Black Wall. He ordered the demolition of the standing cells in which prisoners were tortured, being unable to sit or lie down. Conducted an amnesty for some of the prisoners in the bunker. Ordered the removal of the Black Wall itself, the site of mass shootings. Cancelled the order to shoot any captured fugitive. A former prisoner, political prisoner Tadeusz Pajewski, testified at the trial. With the arrival of Liebenschel, the constant threat of sudden execution disappeared. It didn't get any easier to live in Auschwitz, but death began to seem at least a little less arbitrary. Another witness, Salomon Broad, a prisoner from a group of Jewish prisoners, mentioned, "They continued to send us to the gas chambers. But there was no more public bullying in front of the blocks." Liebenschel was cold and formal. He looked at us as numbers, but he didn't enjoy it. However, all these improvements concerned only the internal discipline regime. The main function of Auschwitz, mass extermination, continued to operate in full force. The gas chambers did not stop. Death trains continued to arrive with thousands of doomed prisoners. Liebenschel did not change the essence of the camp. He simply removed some of the most conspicuous manifestations of cruelty, making the death system more orderly and effective. Against this background, Liebenschel's personal life was the reason for his downfall. After divorcing his wife in December 1943, he entered into a relationship with Anneliese Huttmann, a former secretary in the SS administration. When it became clear that in 1935 she had a romantic relationship with a Jew and even served a short arrest for it, high-ranking SS men raised the alarm. Oswald Pohl, the head of the WVHA, sent Richard Baer with an assignment to convince Liebenschel to break up with Huttmann. However, Liebenschel refused. Moreover, Huttmann became pregnant, and he obtained a marriage license from Heinrich Himmler, which became a scandal in SS bureaucratic circles. On May 8, 1944, Arthur Liebenschel was removed from his post as Commandant of Auschwitz. He was replaced by Richard Baer, the man who was to complete the camp's punitive mission in the last months of its existence. Liebenschel was transferred to Majdanek, Majdanek's command and the last months of the war. After a scandal related to his personal life and his dismissal from office at Auschwitz, Arthur Liebenschel was transferred on May 19, 1944 to Lublin, where he was assigned the leadership of the Majdanek concentration camp. However, by this time the camp had already been partially evacuated. The Red Army was rapidly approaching. Majdanek was another face of the same horror. Here, the Nazis tried to erase the traces of their crimes. They burned documents, destroyed crematoriums, and shot the remaining prisoners. Liebenschel found himself at the center of this panic, managing the liquidation of the camp in an environment where time was shrinking and chaos was intensifying. His role in Majdanek was less active than in Auschwitz. He mainly performed administrative functions in the last weeks of the camp's existence. Most of the mass killings in Majdanek occurred before his appointment, but he still remained part of the crime concealment system. After the final evacuation of the Liebenschel camp, he was transferred to the office of the Supreme SS and Police Chief in the operational zone of the Adriatic coast under the command of Odilo Globoknik, one of the main coordinators of Operation Reinhard to exterminate Polish Jews. There he dealt with organizational issues and administrative support for the remnants of Nazi structures in the region. But this was already the agony of a collapsed regime. Germany was losing the war, the fronts were collapsing one after another, and even the most loyal servants of the system understood the inevitability of the end. In the spring of 1945, with the collapse of the Third Reich, Arthur Liebenschel found himself in Austria. Here he was arrested by American troops and placed in an internment camp. During interrogations at the beginning of his imprisonment, Liebenschel tried to present himself as an administrator who tried to ease the fate of prisoners. He emphasized measures to improve conditions at Auschwitz and denied any personal involvement in the massacres. However, his arguments quickly crumbled under the weight of documents and evidence. It was then that his name appeared on the lists of persons to be extradited to Poland for trial. The court in Krakow, the last attempt at acquittal. In 1947, Arthur Liebenschel appeared before the Supreme National Tribunal of Poland in Krakow as part of the first Auschwitz trial. Together with him, 39 other people appeared in the dock, former employees and guards of the Auschwitz death camp. The charges against Liebenschel were serious: participation in the organization and management of the system of mass destruction of people, crimes against humanity, violation of international laws and customs of warfare. At the trial, Liebenschel tried to build a defense on the image of a humane administrator. He claimed that after his appointment at Auschwitz, the most severe punishments were abolished, improvements in sanitary conditions were introduced, and public executions were stopped. He insisted that he did not personally give orders for mass killings, did not stand at the gas chambers, did not participate in the breeding. I tried to restore order in the camp and alleviate the suffering of the prisoners. I was not a murderer, he repeated at the hearing. However, the court did not rely solely on his words. Documents proving his involvement in the administrative support of the extermination system and numerous witness statements from former prisoners were presented. They confirmed that, despite minor changes in the regime, Auschwitz at Liebenschel continued to function as a death camp. Trains with new prisoners arrived daily. The gas chambers worked without interruption. The prosecutor's office stressed that it is not necessary to personally pull the trigger or let gas into the camera to be responsible for the murders. Managing the camp, ensuring its functioning, and being part of the system was enough to consider Liebenschel an accomplice to crimes. The court refused to accept his acquittal. The verdict stated, "The accused knowingly and voluntarily participated in the management of the destruction system. His actions contributed to the continuation of crimes against humanity." On December 22, 1947, Arthur Liebenschel was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. On January 24, 1948, the sentence was carried out in the Montelupich prison in Krakow. Arthur Liebenschel passed away as quietly as he had lived his career in a system of terror, without making loud statements, without remorse, without trying to change his fate.